Hi, welcome back to Jen's Movies of the Week. This is episode 6. And last week, wow, I watched a lot of really random movies last week, but I did manage to sort of group some of them together. And this week, first of all, I'm going to talk about one of the Billy Wilder films I've seen that is lesser known. Then I'm going to talk about the films of Catherine Breillat, the French film director. And finally, I'm going to just briefly mention a couple of the Halloween films that I rewatched this week. So let's get started. And actually, before I get started, something I've been doing every week is I've been adding one more picture to the wall behind me. I didn't notice until just now, but this week's picture you can't see unless I move my head. But this is the new picture for this week. Tell me if you recognize the movie. And if you go back to episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you'll see that each week there is like a slightly different layout behind me. And I'll be adding new pictures every week until this entire thing is covered. Anyway, let me know if you have any favorites among the movies back here. All right, so first of all, I'm going to talk about an obscure Billy Wilder movie I saw this week. And as you may know from a different episode, I've been trying to watch all the films of Billy Wilder, famous writer and director, who, if you're a film fan, you definitely need to check out his work, especially his most famous stuff like Sunset Boulevard, Double Indemnity. But this week I watched one of his lesser known movies called The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes from 1970. And I gotta tell you, so I got this one on DVD from the library. And if I had not known that it was a Billy Wilder movie, I wouldn't have known. So it's got some of sort of the clever dialogue he's known for, but of course he's using his talents to tell a story in a particular universe, a Sherlock Holmes story. I did not look up to see whether it's based on one of Sherlock Holmes's original stories. I'm assuming it is to some extent. But yeah, it's definitely a change for him. And it's also in color, where I've mostly watched his works that are in black and white before. And so, like, as a Billy Wilder film, I'm not sure it really holds up for me to his past movies. But in terms of like just a kind of a fun movie to throw on, like on a weekend morning, yeah, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes works for that. So I grew up in a family that watched Sherlock Holmes. My younger brother, particularly, was a big fan, and he especially was liked watching the Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes that were like made for TV in the 1980s and the early 1990s. And I have to say, I think that's probably still my favorite portrayal of Sherlock Holmes as well. Even though, of course, there have been many more updated versions since then. But I think he really, that's what I grew up on. And that's sort of how I see the essence of the character. Now, this one, the guy playing Sherlock Holmes, it kind of took a while for me to like get into his portrayal. But by the end of the movie, I was bought in. Watson seemed fine. The only actor that was like very prominent that I noticed in the movie was Christopher Lee, and he shows up as Mycroft Holmes, Sherlock's brother. So that was pretty fun. Overall, the movie was pretty interesting. Like it kind of like starts off with one story and then turns into a different one. I guess originally it was supposed to be a much longer movie and it got cut down. So that may explain some of the oddity of it. Eventually, Sherlock Holmes ends up in Scotland, and there's a whole thing with the Loch Ness Monster. So, seriously, if Sherlock Holmes and Loch Ness Monster sounds good, check it out. Yeah, I don't want to spoil what ends up happening with all of that, but if you're clever, I'm sure you can probably figure it out yourself. Yeah, but it was a fun movie, like worth checking out if you're a Billy Wilder fan or if you're a Sherlock Holmes fan. All right. Now, the only films that I kind of watched in batches this week were Catherine Breillat's films, a few of hers, and then a couple Halloween movies. So, first of all, Catherine Breillat, she's a French filmmaker, and she's best known for directing the movie Fat Girl, which is one of the movies I watched this week. But the reason I was interested in her films was that last year I watched her movie called Bluebeard, which is also available right now on Tubi. And Bluebeard became one of my favorite movies I watched last year. It was on my top first time watches of 2025 list. And I still really like that one. I'm about to rewatch it with my husband just to like, you know, refresh myself. I wasn't able to do it in time for this, but that's okay. Bluebeard was a really interesting telling of the Bluebeard kind of folk story, fairy story. It has like a sort of dual structure where you see two young girls reading the story together in an attic. and then you see other young girls living the story that they're reading. And I like that structure very much. It allows for some interesting commentary on how the kinds of stories we're told as young girls, and how we're kind of led to expect a world of monsters and men who will prey on us. And I found that, we're exposed to this violence when we're young girls that teaches us what it is to be a young girl in the world. I thought that was one of the most interesting things about the movie. The aesthetic is also great. Like, I love when people tell these fairy tales in like modern times, and they use kind of interesting aesthetics to portray the stories, kind of interesting costume choices, things that like you don't see so much in cinema anymore, which is always sort of bent on absolute realism. So yeah, I liked the aesthetics of Bluebeard as well. But I think the things it has to say about feminism and girlhood are the most interesting parts to me. Or if you're just a fan of like fairy tales, Bluebeard is one that doesn't get portrayed as often. So Bluebeard is great, but I haven't watched it recently. I'm about to rewatch it. So but that led me though into watching Breillat's other films. So Fat Girl has been on my radar for a while, and it's on HBO right now. The original French title is À ma sœur, which means to my sister. So I don't really know why they decided to change it to Fat Girl for the English audience, but hey, the one of the characters is indeed a fat girl who's about 12 years old in the narrative, and she has a sister, and the two sisters are the main characters in the movie. So the older sister is about 15 years old, and the two sisters are on vacation together with their family in some kind of like French resort area. We don't really see much of that area. The main thrust of the story is these two girls meeting an older guy who's in fact in college. Okay, and he starts pursuing the older sister, and she's excited about this. Okay, and I think in some ways the younger sister seems slightly jealous at first too, but then he's sneaking into their house, their vacation home, and actually like coercing the older sister into doing sexual things with him. And it becomes like very complicated, okay, because the younger sister is listening to all this and she's having very conflicted feelings about it. And the two sisters are talking to each other about what they want out of sex or romance, even though they're quite young and they really don't know much about the world. One of the interesting things about the movie, though, is that the younger sister actually seems much more knowing and kind of cynical about what the older guy is up to with her sister. Like, she really seems to have a more of a handle on the potential dangers that exist, whereas the older sister is like kind of head in the clouds, like very romantic. So that's an interesting dynamic. Another thing I think is very interesting about the movie is its commitment to kind of realism. You see all these like awkward like details like of daily life that you wouldn't see in most movies. I know it's odd, but one of the things that struck me most was like a girl is eating bread and you see a lap full of crumbs in her lap. And I mean, okay, I don't know. Maybe some of you are perfect out there and you've never had a lap full of crumbs, but I just remember being a teenager and you'd be sitting around eating things with crumbs all over you. You'd be all grotty and dirty and awkward, and like that's real life, but you almost never see real life in the movies. There's also this kind of like touching scene of the younger sister in a pool, imagining that she has these two fantasy lovers and kind of like having little whispered conversations with them as she goes back and forth in the pool. It's just all this like really real awkward stuff that is part of growing up and coming of age that you rarely see in a coming of age movie. Now this movie is very divisive. Okay, especially on Letterboxd, you'll see a lot of people who think that it's irresponsible, especially in terms of like having a very young actress play some of the scenes in the movie. The end scene, which I'm not going to spoil it all, but there's an ending scene which is quite shocking. And I think it would be very triggering potentially to certain people, especially if you don't want to see any content of, non consensual sex, underage sex. This whole movie could be a bit triggering for you. So be careful about that. But I thought it was a very well done, provocative movie. If you want to see my take on the whole movie, including the ending, check out my Letterbox review, which I will put in the description box, because I have a theory about the last scene that I haven't seen many other people express, but I really don't want to spoil it. So I recommend Fat Girl, especially if you're interested in the cinema of coming of age. All right, Catherine Breillat continued. So I watched another one of her films, The Sleeping Beauty. It is also on Tubi. Like Bluebeard, it is a retelling of a fairy tale, but I think it was less effective than Bluebeard. And part of that is because instead of just being about Sleeping Beauty, which I think on its own, there's a lot of rich material to mine in that story, but it also like inserts like kind of the Snow Queen and some other stories that might be French folk tales I'm not aware of, but involving a group of like Romani people and different things like that, involving her fighting like some big kind of ogre like guy. I don't know. It just felt like there was more going on than there needed to be. And the actress who was portraying kind of the very young Sleeping Beauty, she just didn't impress me quite as much as some of the actresses in the other Breillat films. Sorry. But yeah, I just didn't feel it was as successful. But if you're somebody who likes collecting different Sleeping Beauty narratives, this might interest you. If you want to see one that involves some sort of sexuality involved in the story, there is some of that near the end of the movie. So yeah, it could be interesting. I wouldn't say not to watch it, but it just wasn't one of my favorites. All right, and then the last Breillat film I watched this week was Last Summer. Or let me just make sure I'm not, yeah, just last summer. And that's from 2023. As far as I know, it's Breillat's most recent film. It's much more normal than her other films, which is to say that the narrative is pretty straightforward and it's not like dealing with like weird, edgy things about coming of age for girls. In this case, it's a movie, it's a remake of a Danish film. It's about an older woman who has an affair with her stepson, who is 17 years old. So again, it's dealing with sexuality that is not permitted, like transgressive sexuality. And, depending on where you live or how you feel about it, lack of consent because he's only 17 years old. And certainly problematic sexuality, incestuous sexuality. Like she is estranged from her stepson, but you definitely don't get the feeling in the movie as the movie goes on that this is something that is going to be healthy or beneficial in any way to this kid. Okay. Um, it starts out where the kid is almost like seducing her. It could be like one of those Poison Ivy like films from like the 90s, like, or Adrian Lyne movies. um which, that's interesting to note too. Like there have been so many movies about dad figures sleeping with like teenage girls that it was almost a subgenre in the 90s and people barely remarked upon it. But it feels much more transgressive for it to be a mother figure sleeping with a teenage boy. Okay, I mean, I'm just saying that's probably due to patriarchy. Like, but yeah, like I watched this movie and it was just like really dark. And the woman herself plays a person who represents people who are raped sometimes. So she's helping them with the legal system and helping them to, get the people that that they've been raped by, like get justice. And yet now she's in a position where she is the guilty party, and what will she do, so that's kind of the crux of the drama of this movie. um I think there's some scenes that like somebody might find sensual, but I did not find any of it sensual. I found it pretty disturbing throughout. I thought the actors did a really good job. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if I feel better for having watched it, but like certainly there's a place for dramas like this. But unlike some of Breillat's other films, it doesn't seem like particularly necessary or something that like expresses something that only she could have expressed. And I hope she gets back to like making things that are her original ideas again. Yeah. Anyway, last summer, not a bad movie by any means, but just not my favorite of Breillat's work. And I hope to see some more of her films. It's a little hard to come across a few of them. I might have to get Criterion streaming service for a month or so. We can't afford to have it all the time, but a few of hers seem to be on there as well. All right, so let me know in the comments if you've seen any of Breillat's films and what you think about them. All right, finally, a really odd side quest this week. I watched a couple of the Halloween movies from kind of the middle period. And you may know that in 1998, Jamie Lee Curtis was one of the people who spearheaded an effort to kind of make a new like Halloween sequel. Yeah, in this case, it is like a sequel. Halloween H20, 20 years later. Um, and this was quite a 90s time capsule. Okay, this came out in the wake of the whole like Scream coming out, and then everybody wanted teenage horror movies. So it's got that same kind of glossy, um, kind of glossy take on horror as the Scream movies, where it's like a little bit cleaned up, not quite as gritty as something else, and certainly not as cheap as you would find in an 80s slasher in general, which has its pluses and its minuses. Some things about Halloween H20, I'd forgotten that Joseph Gordon-Levitt is like in the opening. I was like, whoa, what's that? Josh Hartnett. I think he was billed as introducing Josh Hartnett in this one, and he's got his really clunky 90s bad hairdo in this movie. Michelle Williams, also with a bad hairdo in her early days around the Dawson's Creek era. So a lot of nostalgia in this one. It takes place. Jamie Lee Curtis is now like the headmistress of this like boarding school, which I think is a great setting for a Halloween movie. So that was fun. And LL Cool J shows up as a security guard. He was doing his horror era too with Deep Blue Sea around the same time. So, I mean, this was pleasurable enough, especially for somebody who was a teenager in the 90s like myself. Just a trip down memory lane. Not necessarily something I'd rewatch a ton, but pretty fun. And that was on, I believe, HBO that I decided to watch that. And then Halloween Resurrection. So because I'd watched Halloween H2, I was like, oh, okay, why not? I'll watch Halloween Resurrection again. Even though I remembered thinking it was bad at the time. And I was working in a movie theater in Seattle when this came out. And my clearest memory about that movie is that I once found a dirty diaper in the back of that movie. And I'm like, who is taking their baby to Halloween Resurrection? Somebody did. And apparently they couldn't get the diaper into the garbage can either. Anyway, Halloween Resurrection, not as good. The concept is that like Buster Rhymes is going to do this like reality show where they all go to Michael Myers' old house, and like he sends a bunch of kids in there with like microphones and cameras, and they're going to live stream, I guess, like what happens in the house. And you find out later that he's prepared a bunch of scares for them. But of course, what do you think happens? Michael Myers comes back to his house. Yes. Um, the acting was pretty much all around bad. I cannot believe the lady who plays Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica was actually in this movie. The final girl is kind of bland, I have to say. I mean, she's not stupid, so that's good, but she doesn't really have a good character arc reason for being in this internet house. Really, the most relatable character to me is this like teenager who's been kind of like catfishing the final girl, pretending that he's older, and so she'll be interested in talking to him. And he and his friends are at a party and kind of helping them avoid Michael Myers during the whole live stream. And there is one pretty funny moment where like Buster Rhymes shows up in a Michael Myers mask, and he thinks that Michael Myers himself is one of his colleagues in a Michael Myers mask, and he scolds him and says, "Hey, I'm the one who's supposed to be scary than the Michael Myers mask. You're not supposed to be." I'm paraphrasing here. "You got to get out of here and go do your job." And Michael Myers just simply walks away, and I was like, that was kind of fun. That reminded me of the kind of thing you can do with Jason in Friday the 13th sometimes, because sometimes Jason's very like portrayed as like a child in a grown-up body, and you can kind of trick him. So I thought that was pretty cool. Overall, yeah, not good, but I mean, it was amusing to revisit it. Halloween is actually my bottom of the three big 80s slasher series. I'm a Friday the 13th girl. I know most people aren't, but I love those. I love summer horror movies. I love camp horror. Then Nightmare on Elm Street, which I think is objectively the highest quality, the most interesting writing, and has the most possibilities and directions it goes. And then Halloween. But to be fair, I've not yet watched the Rob Zombie ones. I might check those out. And I don't think I've seen the two most recent ones. I saw the first one of the most recent cycle. So, yeah. I mean, what do you think? Do you like Halloween movies? Do you have a favorite of those? I mean, other than the obvious first one. And also, like, which is your favorite of the 80s slasher cycle? I'll probably be watching some more of these, rewatching them as we get closer to Halloween itself. All right. And if you're interested in anything I talked about today, please leave me a comment. I respond to all my comments. And if you like the show, please like the video, subscribe. I would love to grow the channel. If I see that it's never getting many views, though, I might quit it because it does take a lot of my energy, and I have long COVID, and so I need to preserve my energy. But if I see that enough people are watching and liking it, then I will keep going. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in again today. Have a great day. Bye bye.